Well, good morning. In December of 2008, the National Bureau of Economic Research, a private group of leading economists, issued a statement that the United States has been in a recession since December of 2007. So by the time it became official, it was acknowledged that we were already in a longer recession than the previous ones of 1990, 91, and 2001. So we now all know we're in a recession. There are approximately 8,500 employees at Boston University, faculty, staff, and others, and about 480 employees signed up to be here at this town meeting today. So that's somewhere between 5 and 6%. So I suspect that those of us who are here this morning have a couple of things in common. We want to learn more about the global economy and the recession and how it's impacting Boston University. We want to better understand how Boston University is going to manage its way through the planning and budgeting of the period we're about to enter, and we want to understand how these issues are going to affect us and what we can do individually to contribute to solutions that we're all seeking collectively. So the good news is that we are starting from a position of strength this year, and that is largely the result of the good work that happens on a day-to-day basis by all of you in the audience and your colleagues. First of all, my name is Joe Mercurio. For those of you who I don't know, I'm Executive Vice President, and I'm joined on the stage by Dr. Karen Antman, Provost of the Medical Campus, Dr. David Campbell, the University Provost, and President Bob Brown. And we also have with us this morning all of the deans of our schools and colleges and many of our vice presidents who will be here to supplement and answer any questions that you might have this morning. I'm going to act as the MC. I know that we all need to get back to work as soon as possible, so we're going to try to keep this to an hour and be on schedule. In a moment, I'll ask Dr. Brown to lead the discussion, and then following his comments, we'll ask for your questions and your comments. And when we get to that, please try to be on point so that there's enough time so that all of your colleagues can have an opportunity to speak if they so desire. So thank you very much for being here this morning. We appreciate it. And without any further ado, I'd like to turn the podium over to Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Joe. I'd like to make the point that this is a two-campus town meeting. We are here in the GSU, and we're connected by video link with our colleagues on the medical campus in the Hebert Lounge. As Joe has said, our goal this morning is to follow up on my email to the community that was sent to all faculty and staff about the impact of the recession on the university and the next steps in our process for finalizing the budget for next year. Joe has given the format to the meeting, so what I would like to do is begin by making a few comments and then open the floor for questions. Back in September, we recognized that the turbulence affecting the financial institutions in this country and worldwide and the decline of the worldwide capital markets were potentially the early signs of a deep and protracted recession. It's nice that the NBER has now verified that that is true. We all feel more comforted by their findings. We also were concerned at that point about the impact of such an economic environment on many aspects of our operations, but none more so than the ability of our students and their families to afford a Boston University education. Based on these concerns, we decided then to freeze all non-essential staff hiring and to defer new capital projects so as to preserve resources. Many of our concerns, unfortunately, have materialized. And as you have read and heard, have been echoed by other private universities as large budget reductions and the actions needed to implement them have been announced by these institutions. Also, as you no doubt have heard, both our state and local governments are feeling the mounting financial impacts of the recession. Since September, we've been working to position Boston University for the financial challenges that we're beginning to face and that may worsen in the coming year. The Office of Financial Assistance, working in collaboration with the Dean of Students Office, has reached out to those students who have seen their financial circumstances change to make available additional financial aid. Since September, we have processed over 630 requests for new or additional financial aid, an almost 100% increase over the number of such applications last year. We are working to help these students continue to afford a BU education and keep them enrolled here. We believe this is just the beginning of a difficult period, as much more unemployment is expected that will surely impact our students and their families. As is true for all our peers, our endowment is down as a result of the falling capital markets. As of the end of November, it stood at approximately $900 million, down from about $1.1 billion as of June 30th of last year, a drop of about 24%. We're building our budget for next year on a necessarily conservative basis, assuming that there will be further declines in the endowment during this fiscal year. These numbers sound very large, and they are. However, the performance of our endowment actually is better than average compared to benchmarks such as the S&P 500 and more customized assessments of market performance. Although the decrease in the endowment is certainly significant to us, it is not the major driver of our budget, unlike the case of many of our peer institutions that have been highlighted in the press. In the current fiscal year, income from our endowment contributes less than 3% of our overall operating revenues. Alternatively, because tuition, fees, room and board from our students represent more than 60% of our revenue, the impact of the recession on them is our biggest concern. And we have budgeted a substantial increase in our financial aid reserve to fund the potential for additional need caused by the economic downturn. We have assembled the fiscal year 2010 budget, that's the budget that starts next July, around these projections with a set of assumptions which are also listed in my email, and I'd like to go over those. We are providing modest salary increases for the exempt administrative staff effective January 1st of this year, with the largest increases going to employees with annual salaries under $60,000, and no increases for employees who earn over $150,000. The salaries of the senior administration, vice presidents, deans, and above, are frozen until July 1, 2010. Modest salary increases have been budgeted for faculty and staff in the next fiscal year. We believe that the below-market position for faculty salaries that we've all heard about justifies our continuing effort to address this issue. Also, administrative and support staff represent a vital resource for the university, and we will do our very best to support and retain employees through modest salary increases. Although these are our goals for increases in compensation, salary freezes going forward remain an option to us, especially if economic conditions worsen. This point highlights the reality that we're living in unprecedented economic times, and we must remain as flexible as possible with respect to the allocation of resources. In keeping with this strategy, we are still holding on all major capital expenditures as we began in October to conserve cash for our core operations and to avoid increased debt. In the months ahead, we will assess specific projects on an ongoing basis as the economic climate evolves and decide which projects, if any, are so critical that they must be launched. Administrative expenses have been frozen except for adjustments for inflation and cost increases for critical services and supplies, as well as the reductions that I will describe in a moment. We expect that the proportion of the budget associated with outstanding debt and other financing expenses for the university will rise in the next fiscal year because of the impact of the recession and the upheaval in the financial markets. We are continuing faculty hiring as our funding allows, so as to continue to staff our academic programs at the level consistent with the excellence we strive for. Finally, we will allocate our scarce, very scarce, discretionary resources to fund initiatives that are important to the future of the university, as described in the strategic plan. When the projected budget for next year is assembled around this set of assumptions, a $10 million gap remains. This gap involves the budgets of academic units on the Charles River campus and the general university administrative units. The medical campus and their administrative services have about a $1 million gap. In our budgeting methodology, these schools and their services are allocated separately. The medical campus will be participating in the process I described below to help drive efficiencies in their services with the goal of reducing this gap. The actions we are taking are aimed at balancing the university budget while guided by a very simple set of principles. We must maintain the quality of a Boston University education through the excellence of our faculty and the classroom environment and the breadth of our offerings. This is essential because the quality of our programs is the foundation of BU, and it enables us to attract the very best students and faculty and to garner the support for their research and scholarship. Nothing is more important to the well-being of this university than the quality of our programs. We need to deliver sustainable efficiencies in our operations and permanent cost reductions. What I mean by this statement is that the changes we make and the reductions in expenses that we should take cannot be seen as temporary hardships that can be undone quickly. Otherwise, we'll not have institutionalized the changes, and we will not be well positioned to weather a long recession. We must minimize the impact of these reductions on the quality of our services to our faculty and students. We must be able to continue our momentum for improving the university. Important initiatives such as continuing to innovate in undergraduate education, improving student educational services, and hiring and retaining the very best faculty are key to our future, and we cannot let these important goals be derailed by the economic downturn. Our guide for managing the university through this period will be our strategic plan and the shared commitments and the strategic goals described there. We will maintain the momentum of the university toward these goals, even if achieving them will take a bit longer than we had hoped. Now, our expense reductions efforts will focus initially on two specific objectives. First, we should reduce subsidies for activities and services that are not essential to our core missions of education and research and to the commitments and goals laid out in our strategic plan. Here we are examining subsidies to external organizations, to academic centers and institutes within BU, and to auxiliary units that were designed to be financially self-funding, but for which the business models have not delivered the required results, especially in the economic climate we face. Second, we will examine and potentially reorganize key administrative services across both academic and administrative units to increase efficiency and remove redundancy. We will focus on 7 initial service areas for this effort. These are, and I'll go through them, desktop computer services and information technology, that's 1, financial and administrative services, research administration, alumni relations, PC cluster maintenance, event coordination, and publications, broadly defined. Most of these services have traditionally been organized unit by unit. We recognize that this existing pattern allows for a level of convenience and local control, but it also can lead to considerable redundancies and inefficiencies. We believe there are significant synergies and operational efficiencies that can be created by reorganizing these functions, at least partially, across administrative and academic units. In some cases, these changes will lead to reorganizations of functions into clustered or centralized services. For each area, we have established working groups led by a senior administrator and including representatives from our schools and colleges and administrative units. Their task is to report back to the senior leadership next month with their recommendations for the organizational changes that will increase efficiency and reduce expenditures. As our plans for reorganizing services develop, there will be no doubt that the changes will result in some positions being eliminated. Let me emphasize that point. Some positions will be eliminated in the reorganization. Now, our freeze on staff hiring that began last October and which is still in effect has created a resource of open staff positions that, if at all possible, will be used to manage the reorganization process so that we minimize the need for layoffs of current employees. Nonetheless, it is likely that some layoffs will be required to meet the objectives of the reorganization. Our goal is to close the budget gap through the combination of reduced subsidies and service reorganization. If successful, we will be able to avoid budget reductions for academic and administrative units beyond the impacts of these two efforts. The working groups for each area have begun their work. I hope that they will be able to report their recommendations by the middle of February, and that we will finalize our plans by March 1, with the goal of implementing the changes during the remainder of the calendar year. I also expect that many of you might have ideas or suggestions for improving the efficiency of our operations or other steps that we might take that are outside these two initiatives. If so, you can send them to my office directly to the email address president@bu.edu. We will share your ideas with appropriate working groups or with others within the university. I have been through the process of making budget reductions before in a university setting, and I know how difficult they are on all involved with the implementation, and how the changes brought by the reorganizations, like the ones we are discussing, cause anxieties throughout the university. This process will be especially difficult for us, given the great momentum Boston University has over the last couple of years because of the hard work of all of our staff and faculty. You are the foundation of this great university. With your continued support, with the solid financial foundation that we're building on, and with our core principles and our plan as guides, Boston University will navigate the recession and emerge a stronger institution when it's over. With that, let me open the floor for questions. Yes. Do we have microphones, correct? Well, wait. Raise your hand and we'll get you a mic. Here we go.
Hi, I have a two-part question.
It'd be good to stand, please.
Sure. Part one, do we have any indication at this sense in the cycle of admissions how we're doing for the incoming freshman class? And also, do we have any indication that there's going to be a higher attrition rate for upper class students transferring to less expensive institutions and so forth?
Well, those are very good questions. First, the good news is, although we have made no public announcements, you saw Harvard getting a little press this morning about this. Our application base is very healthy. Right now, we're running slightly ahead of last year. Last year, we had 38,000 applications for our undergraduate class, and we're running slightly ahead. The guess right now is we'll have at least as many applications as last year. That's the good news. If you look at today, how many of those students are requesting financial aid? The answer, it's up by, I think, where's Lori? Is Lori here? It's up by 12%, 15%?
Requests that they indicate that they're going
Yes.
to apply, yes.
Is up by 15% from last year. And all of our indications is the need level is going to be up significantly. So that was part one of your question. Very good question. Second is, when you think about these appeals for financial aid, when I said we processed 630 appeals, we've been working very hard, and we talked about this through the fall, to reach out to the students through Lori's office and Dean Elmer's office to identify those students who are at risk of transferring to someplace else. We've seen larger than typical requests for transcripts last year in the fall. We've reached out. We're down slightly in terms of the number of retaining students, but not many from last year, so we haven't seen a mass exodus of students at all. But we're still concerned, and we will be doing that same outreach again in the next several months of our existing students to keep them here for next fall. But so far, things are held. But there has been additional expenditures in financial aid to make that true. Good questions. Oh, come on, there's got to be others. Am I not seeing it? Where? Where? Oh, on the med. Yes, Doug, you got one?
I'm here. I have a microphone. I'm looking for questions here in the room.
Okay.
We have one right
All right.
I have a question.
Yes, got one here.
Hi, Dr. Brown. I'm wondering if what the plans are to reach out to alumni and other potential prospects or donors to boost Boston University's resources at this time.
Well, there's a two-part answer to that question. We've been working very hard for the last several years to reach out to friends and alumni of the university to garner more support for the university. And although we don't say numbers publicly, the first half year we've actually, in terms of both pledges and cash receipts, we have very good news. Actually, for the first half year, we are up for the half year, and although other institutions aren't talking publicly, the word on the street is everybody else is down. So the good news is we're up, and our pledges are up very substantially with some very major pieces in the pipeline. That's good news. But the flip side of that is you don't go out to your donor base to ask them to plug a budget gap. You ask them to support the core mission of the university. And so the fact is that while fundraising is up on a short time scale, it decouples from the issue we have here. That's the downside of that.
Questions?
Okay. Yes. Whoever's got a
I'm
mic.
going to go right here first.
Yes. Okay.
Hello, I wondered if you could speak to expected tuition increases and how you balance the need for additional resources for BU with the tough economic times.
We're very, very sensitive to the ability that there are salary freezes, low salary increases all across this country today, as well as unemployment, and the tuition increases have to take that into account. In our budget projection, we won't announce a tuition increase until everything's been approved by our trustees, and that won't be for several months yet. But we will have a more moderate tuition increase than you have seen in the last several decades because of the economic conditions we're in. But it is a balancing act, because obviously that tuition increase feeds right into this budget calculation that we have in front of you.
I have two questions back here.
There's a mic here. Is there a mic?
I've got a mic right here.
Okay, go.
What percentage of the operating budget goes to debt service? And I realize that credit markets are restricted right now, but with our ever-improving credit rating, have we looked into dealing with debt service issues? And then my second totally unrelated question is, will you be announcing who is on the working groups for the particular areas that you're looking to identify for cost reduction?
Yeah, I don't have the percentage of our budget for debt service right off the top of my head. 4.5. It's under 5%. We have a very sophisticated set of financial agreements in terms of the combination of variable rate and fixed rate debt that have kept that number traditionally low within the university. So it is not a major fraction of our total operating budget. So that's the answer to the first question. Second is, at this point, I do not plan to announce the working groups because I actually believe that what that will do is create an intense set of lobbying on those individuals that I'd rather not see. Yes.
Has there been discussion about early retirement options for people who may have worked on the staff for a long period of time to help save jobs, number one? And then number two, is there a possibility of decreasing the work week during the summer when the university may not be as busy so that we can help save each other's jobs if that's the case?
The early retirement option, there's been some initial discussions, but nothing concrete at this point. There are many different kinds of approaches some places you'll see take in a tight budgetary time that have to do with shared sacrifice across the institution, whether it's a decreased work week, an unpaid vacation, salary decreases, all kinds of things that you do not see us talking about. And these are hard decisions to make, I want you to understand. But I believe, and I think the senior management of the university leadership believes, that the university is better served by doing things that are truly sustainable across the institution for a number of years. And decreased compensation for everyone, decreased work weeks, that means there's a lot of work that doesn't get done, is not a sustainable way of approaching the problem. And so that's why we've taken the approach we have. We've considered those options and have said not, and decided not to do them.
in going back to the restructuring and the potential layoffs, could you specify a little more the timing and the framework and how people affected might hear about it or be involved, and how the rest of us might be learning about it? What should we be foreseeing in the next 3 to 6 months?
What we see is that the working groups hopefully will come back with their recommendations on the time frame by March 1st. And that means that in a area by area, service by service, we will then start working with those reorganizations. And so I would believe that that kind of a time frame is when we'll hear anything coming back from these working groups concrete that we will act on. Obviously, when you start talking about those restructurings, depending on the complexity, some will take weeks and months to do, and some will stretch into the next fiscal year to actually implement. The question is how fast we can understand where we want to go and how much money we have to reserve to make those reorganizations work on the other side. And we hope to get that done in the March before April, essentially. So that's about the best I can say at this point.
We have a question over here, Bob.
Yes. Med. Yes. I don't know that I should stare at that. I don't think they're looking at me that way anyway. So, go.
Hi, I'm on the medical campus. The financial services have been like very fractured. You have to look in one computer program to find this and another computer program to find that. And we were told some time ago that they were working on restructuring that. Is your restructuring of the financial section going to include that? Does that make sense?
Let me give some indication, then ask Karen to make a few remarks. We are in the midst, as everyone in the community has heard, of the BU Works project, which really is about our core financial electronic systems. When we do the restructuring now, which are really about people and organizations, we want to take into account in that restructuring the world we're headed toward in terms of the new enterprise resource system that will be part of BU Works. And we're fortunate because the BU Works team over the last year has done the analysis to get a vision for what that world will look like in terms of the electronic world that we're headed to. And many of you probably have been involved in the demonstrations that have been, Peter, over the last 2 weeks by SAP and Oracle, giving you some indication of the world they try to create. Unfortunately, we're going to make the people reorganizations before we have the software product as an institution. But these two things will come together on some time scale. Now let me ask Karen to take the rest of the comment.
We on the medical campus have some differences from the Charles River campus administratively in that we actually have about 3 administrative systems. We have the hospital, we have the medical school, and then we have many functions that we overlap with Boston University. Certainly our administrators have been very much involved in the BU Works and we're utterly committed to it. It will make it much more efficient for us to keep some of our databases. Just one example of how the databases are different is that on this campus, the faculty database would have room for maybe 2 to 5 teachers for any given course. On the medical campus, we would regularly have 30 faculty teaching a course, and there's just no room on the BU faculty database for 30 faculty to teach a course. So we hope that with respect to BU Works, we'll be able to get a system that will be useful on both campuses, and that we will then have evidence-based decision-making because you'll have access to the data that you need to make administrative decisions.
Thank you, Karen. Yes.
Good morning. We have a couple concerns with our work, is both here in medical campus. One is the fact that none of us should be laid off or sent home with outside contractors here. And also our input in the beginning stages, so we could help with our input on saving money. Sometimes in the past, and it hasn't happened that often here, is we don't get to give our input till after the fact. So we have ideas and ways to save money ourselves that we'd like to early input on it.
No,
Thank you.
it's a great comment, and one of the reasons we have all of the vice presidents and the deans arrayed up front is so that one is that in each of the units, everyone is looking as well in terms of not only these shared services, which you notice buildings and grounds is not one of those shared services, but where people think there can be local efficiencies within either administrative or academic units. And there are people coming up all the time with great ideas. And we're going to wrap all this together to close that $10 million gap. But with the focus on the shared services and the subsidies we talked about. Great comment, though.
We have a question over here, Bob, on the medical campus.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I work in the public safety department on the medical campus, and our department is seeing cuts currently on the hospital side. We have been told that there are going to be cuts on the BU side as well. And last year, we've increased our public safety incidences over about 20%. Our arrests have gone up 35% and throughout the campus. And my department is more concerned about our own safety and the safety of the employees. How does your essential employees fit in your plan of cuts? And is it going to be at the expense and the risk of the employees and staff?
I'm going to ask Joe Mercurial to answer your question. The first thing that I will say is that when you look at, obviously, public safety is not one of the areas we're reorganizing as part of this process we're talking about. It was not one of the 7 areas. Joe, do you want to?
Well, excuse me, public safety at the medical campus is a function that's handled on a shared service basis. So it is a combined administrative oversight of both the hospital and the medical center administration. And the cuts that are being inquired about are decreases that the hospital has had to take because of the severe financial cuts that they have taken as a part of the state's reorganization of the healthcare system. And they've been cutting essentially across the board in all areas. But with regard to our concern for public safety, not only at the Charles River campus, but also at the medical campus, we have said repeatedly from the first day that we understood that we had a financial issue to deal with back in the last September when the hiring freeze was put into effect, that public safety was exempt from both the hiring freeze and from other budgetary restrictions. So from the university's perspective, we want to both reassure the staff at the medical campus as well as the Charles River campus that we place the highest priority with regard to supporting the public safety staff at both campuses.
Thank you, Joe. We need a mic up here. Someone else have a mic? Here we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, President Brown. Could you talk a little more about financial aid and what resources might be available for financial aid if this is a greater need? And will the university be able to increase the financial aid it gives students? And might it be possible to appeal to the alumni as a possible source of increasing financial aid?
In our budget, as I said both in the letter and in my remarks this morning, our budgeting includes a very substantial increase in our financial aid reserve, which basically is taking into account that under our financial aid system, the qualification system that we have in place for students meeting need-based financial aid, that we will have more needy students and thus we will give more aid. And so the way what we're preparing for is that in our students, when we select our students coming into the university, that there's going to be a higher level of need to attract the qualified students that we want. And we're preparing for that. The idea of a direct appeal to the alumni to try to close that gap and fund that aid is appealing, but I don't think it'll work. I mean, if you look at today, the amount of financial aid that we get from our alumni today and in history of supporting this university through financial aid has been relatively small. If you look today, Lori, it's about 4% of all of our financial aid is funded through endowment for financial aid. The rest is funded by operations of the university. And so this has not been traditionally a strength of Boston University compared to a few of the Ivy Leagues where it's very strong. So it is, again, not the way to plug a budget gap. We continually, as we go out and raise money, try to cultivate alumni to give to financial aid, and hopefully over long time scales, decades, we will be able to change that ratio and increase the amount of financial aid that's supported for the university. It's not going to happen on a short time scale.
We have one over here, Bob.
Okay. One on the med campus.
Good morning. I was wondering if there are any current projections for expected job loss numbers.
The answer is no. No, because in these reorganizations of the services, they're looking at a combination of materials, supplies, outside contracts, and positions. So it's way premature to look at numbers at this point. Yes.
Hi, I'd like to ask if you have any idea if the federal government is going to be helping out students. They seem to be quite interested in that problem.
Well, what in the next version of the bailout, whatever, or stimulus, and whether you're stimulated or bailed out, I'm not sure. There's language that's in there at this point to increase yet again what's called the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant is the federal grant and loan program for students that come from the lowest income sector. Lori, do you want to? Can Lori get a mic? She's much better at describing the Pell program.
Yeah, the Pell program is available to our lowest income students. That has historically not kept pace with inflation. So what they are trying to do is both increase the amount that's available in terms of the full grant, as well as fully fund the program for the first time. And that is included, as we understand, as of last week in the stimulus package.
Yes. But remember, when the federal government puts out money, they will put out money that affects students in the same at the same amount across all public and private universities. And so the impact of those programs in terms of us, in terms of the amount of money that Pell students bring to Boston University, is actually relatively small. It has a huge impact on state schools because the tuitions are much lower. Is that fair? Yeah. And that's the only program I know of that will directly impact students. Other questions? One up here.
Are you currently, or will you be looking at benefits as a way to reduce costs? And
We
if so,
will.
what areas?
We will. It is something that we continually look at the benefits we offer to optimize their impact on our employees. And so this is, as you've noticed, our benefits are not stagnant. We are continually optimizing those, and we will look at that. We're not, I'll be very honest, we're not looking at the kinds of large changes that you see some universities doing, some publics, where they're making huge, drastic changes in the proportion of healthcare costs. I don't know if you followed this. Those kinds of things we are not putting on the table.
Got one over here, Bob.
I've got one here, then I'll come back to you, Doug.
Thank you, President Brown. What do you anticipate in terms of faculty layoffs?
None. If I understood that, faculty? Yeah, there are no faculty layoffs. In fact, we're continuing faculty hiring. Be clear. I think I was clear about this. Taking faculty out of the classroom, cut the offerings we have, make it more difficult for students to come here, more difficult for students to pick us over our competitive schools. That's the business we're in. So there are no layoffs. In fact, we're continuing hiring. I'm
sorry. We're losing 10% of our faculty at CGS.
That's because the number of students have gone down. Doug?
Good morning, President Brown. I'm wondering if you can tell us the $10 million shortfall in the university budget and the $1 million on the medical campus, what percentage of those respective budgets does that represent?
That's a good question, and we thought about actually putting that data in different communications. When you look at our overall university budget, it's very complicated because a lot of our budget is in research and grant support, which is external funds coming in the university. So I'm going to factor that out in the answer to my question. And if you look at the Charles River campus budget by itself, the $10 million represents about 1.5%. About 1.5% of what I would call the university general budget. Derek, is that about right? Derek Howell. On the medical campus, it's not quite fair to make that factoring out the research budget because indirect costs from research pays for so much of the operations on the medical campus. If you do an all-in calculation at the medical campus, again, it's about a 1% number.
If you do the operating budget, it's 1%. If you add in the research, it's about 0.25%.
Okay, so it's 1% on the operating budget, 0.25% with research in. So these are relative to the numbers that you hear from our sister institutions, these 10% cuts, 5% cuts, 10% per year for 3 years. $10 million is a small number. Doesn't make it any less painful.
Good morning, President Brown. A majority of financial aid benefits domestic students. I'm wondering if there are any steps being taken to secure additional aid for international students given the collapse of international markets and exchange rates.
This is a very difficult question, and we are in the midst of trying to understand how one would give need-based financial aid to international students. The collapse, the currency change can be looked at two different ways. You could look at it last year, we were a big bargain for everybody in the world because the dollar was so bad, and we're less of a bargain today. The international collapses are essentially very similar to the collapses you have for domestic students. At this point, what I'd say is they're under consideration. It's complicated to give need-based financial aid for international students, something that this institution at some point will have to do. The question is this the right time to do it?
Got one over here, Bob, medical campus.
Okay, go.
Yeah. Morning. You've spoken at length about financial aid and its impact on undergraduate students, and I wonder if is there some thoughts about how this might affect graduate students, particularly non-doctoral students across the university, who majority of whom probably do get some financial aid.
The question about financial aid, and I'll separate into what I call professional students versus research students, is a way of talking about this, is one that I know is under consideration and discussion in individual schools and colleges that have, for example, professional master's programs. The question is like everything else, is going to be an internal budget issue. These programs, most of these programs, the sizes of these programs are self-decided, internally decided within the school or college, and it's going to come down to financial aid in that environment, trading off within the school or college against other resources that they have. Budgeting it centrally would only make our gap larger, unfortunately, and we have decided not to do that. Yes.
I'm coming behind.
Yeah, here's one's coming up down the center aisle.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. President. Could you please comment on the necessity to raise tuition costs given the current economic climate?
If you look at the cost structure of the university, if you look at the increases in financial aid we're talking about, when you talk about tuition, you should look at tuition as a cost borne by everyone versus the need for balancing access to the university by people who don't have the financial means to come without financial aid. And it is a balance. It's a balance between giving a lower number for everybody, which would be, for example, not having a tuition increase at all, versus having financial aid available for students who have need. And our decision is to keep those two things in balance by increasing our financial aid reserve and some moderate tuition increase on the other side. The options, if you look at options, the other option is to take away from needy students and put the money to everybody by keeping the tuition increase down. It's a balance between those two things. And it's a balance between the quality of our programs and the quality of our staff and the services we add. They're hard decisions, they're complicated decisions, but we think we get the best university going forward with the balance that we're going to propose.
How do you see all this affecting the university's libraries?
I don't see, right now, I do not see a direct effect. One of the questions that I think we always looked at is any one of our academic units is the question is from an efficiency perspective, when you think about the organization of our libraries, is it the best, most efficient system we could possibly have? That's something that Bob Hudson and David Campbell, the provost, will work on. But it isn't in the what you call the crosshairs that we talked about today.
Morning, Dr. Brown. Do you anticipate increasing enrollment to offset any of the budget?
No. No. In fact, this is a balance between the quality of our students and our ability to serve those students through the classrooms and the faculty that we have, the facilities we have, housing and dining and other things, that trying to make up the gap by increasing the number of students in the university is not, again, a sustainable model for the gap. For those of you who watch these large classes come through the university that came through over the last couple of years, those caused incredible hardship on different academic units and crowded our dormitories, did all kinds of things that are ill effects in terms of the quality of the university. So we essentially have taken that off the table as an option.
You have given us a rough sense of the timeline for a re-examination of shared service areas. I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of the timeline for examination of the role of the various centers and institutes that you referred to earlier on as part of the cutting?
The same timeline. We would hope that, because we'll be affecting fiscal year 2010 budgets, the timeline's got to be very similar. Okay.
Got one over here on the medical campus, Bob.
Okay, Doug?
Hi, Bob. What can we do, individual faculty members, that is, to help Boston University weather the economic downturn?
Well, I think that the individual faculty and staff, what I think that we're going to ask everyone to do is continue, A, to do what they do very, very well, which is what people are doing. And second, as reorganizations are discussed, when business as usual changes, because it will change in some of these services, be flexible, adaptable, and give things a chance to work. That's the most important thing everybody can do. Because change is difficult. Change is difficult even if it's not attached to a budget cut. And everyone is going to be impacted by these services. And so I think that that's the main thing the community can do for us.
Yes, what level of transparency will you use throughout this process?
I think the level we're using now, not trying to be flip, we will at the end, when you start talking about individual services and organizations, organizations normally don't make broadcast announcements about things that happen locally. As we reorganize services, as we think about those, we will talk about them in the community so people understand how changes have been made. I think we're doing a pretty good job about that right now. Okay, I don't. Doug? We have one here.
There's been talk of this new school that would be, I guess, replacing the university professors program. Is that sort of idea going to be going forward?
What in my remarks, one of the important points is that we can't lose momentum in the important things we need to do to increase the quality of this university, especially innovation with respect to our undergraduate programs. The pace at which things will go forward will undoubtedly be impacted because of the financial times we're in. The discussions of New College, as it's called, are still underway. There's still a lot of discussions going on in the academic units. And there will be discussions this spring at the Board of Trustees, which will be important in that process. So I would love to see discussions like those not derailed, that's the word I used, by the economic times we're in, because they're the lifeblood of the university. We have to keep the academic business as usual going forward. Timescales may be slower. There's one over here.
In your opening remarks, you mentioned 6 areas, and 2 of them relate to computing. And you've also laid out a time frame that you think changes might occur on. Could you comment on how that might relate to a time frame for announcing the permanent VP of IS&T?
The process for the permanent vice president is well underway. I'm not at a point where I can announce that time frame yet, but it will be this spring for sure. It's a good question. Yes.
Hey, Dr. Brown, I'd like to have a follow-on question concerning IT. Has the university considered consolidating its disk space services, having a single unit and supplying disk space across all the campuses and colleges? Because that would be a big potential savings. And I hear little rumors of it from time to time, but
these are the kinds of things we need to put on the table, and that's a great comment, and one that the Information Technology Group should take up. And the answers I've heard this come up, it's kind of like a wave crashing into the beach, right? It comes up and then dissipates, comes up and dissipates. Maybe this is a time to do something. But let me just say something. That's an example of a decision that will have both present cost implications and probably long-term savings, because to implement it, some of these things to implement will cost money to implement. And that one, because you would centralize and you would end up having much larger disk farms than you have, we probably don't have a space you could put all of that right now in one centralized place. But you may have to have fixed costs up front to get the savings downstream. And we will have some of those that'll look funny from a cost savings point of view, because we will spend money now to save money long term. It's a good example of that. Doug?
All quiet here.
All right. Man on the medical campus. The interesting thing, we've never seen the audience. We don't know if those people actually exist.
I am their witness.
It's actually Doug in a closet. Other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. Let's go back to work.